Listen vision, listen vision. DC's #1 recording studio.
You was jealous, it's all your fault. You was jealous, it's all your fault.
My name is Cynthia Gayton, and I'm here with Carolyn Norbury, and she is here on behalf of Creative England. And she's attending a summit called the National Creative Economy Summit here in Washington, D.C. It's a 2-day summit that is going on right now, and I'd like to talk to Carolyn about her experience as CEO of Creative England. Her background is in filmmaking, I understand, and I think that's continues to be a passion for you.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly interested in the creative economy and creative industries. I've been working with artists for many, many years, and I do volunteer work as well as represent artists. And I wanted to, it's actually very enjoyable to have you here because I think it's an important discussion, and it's a beautiful day, so it's a great opportunity. The first question I wanted to ask you was about how individual artists can get involved with the creative economy. When I talk to artists, and I do often, they don't seem to understand how to get involved with the city initiatives and state initiatives regarding the creative economy. They don't know if it's part of an arts organization, if it's a city or government organization, and they seem to be perplexed about what it is and how they can actually participate.
Okay. Well, I suppose I can't comment an awful lot around what the sort of stuff that you have in America. Mm-hmm. But I think that my sense, if you're asking me what does it mean to be part of the creative industries or the creative economy, I think the distinction is that something with the arts, there's an intrinsic value to a painting or to a piece of music or a dance, whatever, and that's absolutely that's incredibly important, and a thing I think it needs to be supported and invested in and so on. But I suppose a lot of the sort of companies, businesses, artists, creators that I work with or my company works with are taking that one step further into a commercial world, which is how can they turn that how can people turn that into a business or derive some sort of revenue from it, and I suppose rather than perhaps get sort of cut up thinking about should I go through some sort of public agency, etc., etc., etc. Actually, if you've got a great idea, if you've got a great product, if you've got a talent, if you've got something to say, which I think is probably the most important thing about cultural expression, is actually saying something reasonably relevant that other people want to hear. The point is, these days, I suppose that you do have an audience through the internet. So my advice would be around that thinking that every creative business, I think, has a potential to be a global business. Getting visibility is quite hard, but that's why you need aggregators, and you need to find your you call it a niche, we call it a niche, but you need to find your sort of your niche, and find the aggregator or the platform that most represents perhaps your values or your interests or where you think your audience is. And I suppose that's what's so great around sort of platforms like this. I know very little about WLVS radio, but it seems to me, just from talking to you guys, in terms of the ways in which you make available your facilities for people to come and talk about, you know, what they do and promote their stuff, you know, that's a very concrete example of something that's out there in the community that's accessible, that allows you to, you know, market and promote your wares and your talents to a much broader audience.
Okay. And that leads me to the next question dealing with investing. And we talked about this a little bit before we went on air, is how the idea of investing. There is, from a business perspective, a return on investment. If you give money, then you're expecting some certain percentage perhaps in return. And I was very interested in your discussion yesterday about your investing in businesses in terms of the intellectual property and the content, which are things that are marketable versus just the idea. In which case, to me, it becomes more of an innovation, applied creativity in a way. But could you talk a little bit about what your thinking is around investing in creative industries and creative ideas, and perhaps even just the film industry?
Okay, so you know, a lot of what Creative England does is around investing in and the very early stage proof of concept. So whether that's an idea for a video game, or it may be a new digital platform or a digital application, or it could be a piece of content. Everything that we do is really very early stage, and the rationale for that is that actually there are quite a lot of pots of money around. You know, I mean, it's not so much that there isn't money; it's how you navigate the way to get that money, and a lot of it is also about the networks that you're in. So one of the important things that Creative England does, and I don't know that you necessarily, it doesn't seem to me that you have a direct equivalent here in the US, but we put money in, but we also provide a whole set of connections to other networks and to people who can support you and help people grow. And I suppose the you know, the rationale, the point behind what it is that we're doing is that unless you've got something to show, it's very difficult with a creative business to get people on board, because constantly you're talking about something that doesn't exist yet. So when you're, you know, if you're a new type of catering business, you know, people have an idea. You might come up with a bizarre new sort of like mesh of different, you know, different food. I don't know, cultural, you know, different food from different cultures, and you want to sort of blend it together, but people still have an idea of what it is that you're talking about. Or you might want to open a bar, or you might want to, I don't know, you're developing a new widget for a car. So, but there's a picture in people's minds. Quite often with a creative business, it doesn't exist yet, and the idea is just in your head.
Right.
So actually giving people the money to make that thing concrete, to provide something to show, gives them a step into making it happen. And so what we're not about is, we're not about funding things because I don't know, for some sort of like, you know, moral imperative. I mean, although we could talk about that, but we're not doing that. What we're doing is giving people that first step into a place where then they can find out whether or not their idea is going to work in a market, and where they can take it to people who are investors of some sort, or who are financiers or bankers, or, you know, other types of people with money, so that then the market and the people who know a bit more about what your market opportunity might be can help.
And that's one thing, certainly with the granting system, is that the money goes to you and you perhaps report back, but there may not be any follow-up. Like what are the next steps after the grant has been spent, or whatever the process is that you participate in as part of the grant process, at least in the United States. The accountability and what happens next is not necessarily there, unless perhaps you're with an angel investor who's interested in the long-term purpose of your company. So that's one thing about the granting system, at least in my opinion, that has a lot to be desired with regard to what happens to, you've done your proof of concept, you see that there potentially is a market, now what? If you don't have the relationships.
Yeah,
and
I think it's really important that when we put any sort of money of any type in, and we do make some grants available, but they tend to be grants that are for content creation, because we know that we're not going to get our money back particularly. So it seems a bit, if we're funding a film, and most of the films that we fund are sort of auteur-led, or they're very, they're quite indie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, it's going to be we're funding them for reasons that are other than to make a profit, really. So I think you've got to be very, very clear about why you're putting money in and what you expect out of it. But other than that, even for that, we know that there's a particular audience for it, I suppose. But with all of the businesses that we put money into, it's really, really important that they've got a clear idea of what the market opportunity is for them. And therefore, the money that we put in is useless if we don't then connect it to other people within that ecosystem, or within an ecology that can help to provide all the other stuff that you need in order to make a business work. Because money's only, not only, but money's a part of the puzzle. It's not everything.
Right. And definitely the networking and the connections, and that's where, at least in my experience, the artists are lacking. And they know people within their industry, but not necessarily do they have relationships even with people who have money, and perhaps even attorneys, and so many people that can help them.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that, aren't we?
Right.
We all like to fish in a pond that we're already quite familiar with. We all like to talk to people who look a bit like us, sound a bit like us, have got a similar sort of background, etc. I think there are some parts of the creative industries that are particularly guilty of that, and that's why we have such a problem, I think, with diversity, because it's a very, very networked industry, and it's really hard. Particularly, I'm sure it's hard in the States. It's quite hard in the UK, where it is a lot around who you know and where you live, and opportunities come. If you live in parts of London, it's very easy to bump into somebody who knows what a venture capitalist is. If you live in the rural northeast, you probably might know what a venture capitalist is, or an angel, but you're not going to be bumping into them in any networking events,
That's
so
very true.
it's so a lot of what we're doing is, our focus is on those businesses that are trying to grow in those places where those networks maybe are quite immature. And so what we're trying to do is to direct our investment there where it's needed most.
And and I was just thinking about some experiences that I've had recently in Washington, D.C. Of course, you can't throw a stick without hitting an attorney, but that is not the case in many other parts of the country. You don't have to go far outside of Washington, D.C. to understand that access to people with a legal background or business background, and just having those relationships, it's difficult. And then, as you said, when you've already kind of kept yourself in your comfort zone and haven't reached out, that's, everyone is a little bit guilty of that, and it does take some effort to stretch into a different industry, especially when you're not familiar with it. We talked earlier about the word must, and I'm hoping WLVS will put your YouTube lecture on after this and have a link to it.
Oh, really?
No, not. I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. And the word that struck and that we talked about earlier was the word must versus can or may in terms of investing.
Or should. I'm a great hater of the word should.
In investing in the arts, perhaps big, little arts versus big arts, not just fine arts. And when people are thinking about, we have limited resources, or you have, substantial resources, if you have the opportunity to give to any one of the very worthy causes, what is it about the arts that you think requires some specific attention? Okay.
Well, I suppose first off, I don't really feel comfortable with this idea of the arts as a cause. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't use that language.
Okay.
So I think that, I think lots of things, obviously. but so let me ramble for a bit. So the first is, I suppose that I think it's really important to have a meaningful life. And I think that particularly if you live in a sort of, the privileged Western world, we just, maybe not everybody, but a lot of us have got enough stuff. You know, we've got enough stuff. you need other things that bring meaning into your life. And for me, my background actually is in politics. So I studied government at university, and I was always moved by political campaigns which were about improving people's lives. And so my initial interest in the arts was really just around the way in which the arts changed people's lives and changed my life, and sort of opened all sorts of doors and windows and thoughts for me that were very, very empowering. So I think that I did a lot of work with people who were disadvantaged in some way or other, and from my own sort of experiences of things that I'd gone through, and actually being able to tell your story, and that's how I got into filmmaking, helping other people to tell their story in a way that was compelling, was really, really important in terms of reaching other people who might not feel that anybody understood what they were going through, but also as a way for yourself for just owning stuff, really. So I think that's really, really important that we for me, that's how I found some sort of meaning. But I also think that there's basically an economic imperative to in terms of the work that the arts unlocks and that culture and creativity unlocks. If you think about the fact that we operate in a global marketplace, and because I suppose maybe in the States you've got such a huge domestic market, maybe I don't know if maybe it's quite as present for you as it is for us in the UK, but we're a tiny little place, I mean, we might sort of strut our stuff on the world stage, but we're a very small market, and so it's really important to be to find out, to keep doing things that other people aren't doing. So for many of our businesses and many of our citizens, it's really, really important that we mine all those things that we're great at. And I think that with the automation is, it sounds ridiculous to still be talking about it, but obviously it's had a massive impact on jobs. We see all other countries coming into the global marketplace that can produce things quicker and cheaper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they've got access to lots of different raw materials that perhaps we don't have. So we have to find a thing that we're really, really good at. And I think that for your own creativity is something that you are really, really good at. And there are so many people say, "Oh, I'm not creative," but actually creativity isn't the ability to write a brilliant poem or paint a picture or write a great novel. A lot of it is about thinking laterally. It's about being able to problem solve. It's about how do you work with other people, because maybe not all, but most great creative people are the sum of a whole lot of other people who are all sort of like working with them. You look at any great music artist, that artist isn't, is nothing without their crew and all of those other things underneath that underpin them. And I think the same is true of lots of other types of creative people. So I think that it's, given how competitive the global marketplace is, given given the fact that we all need to find our own niche, for many people, doing that through their own creativity and creating products or creating services or creating meaning, and being able to commercialise in that in some sort of way, is absolutely an economic imperative. So that's a bit long, wasn't it?
No, but it's exactly right. I think in terms of just thinking about what you're good at least identifying those things is well beyond what a lot of people do. A lot of people will look at what is fashionable or at the moment and not necessarily leverage the skills that they already have, or the knowledge that they already have, or something that they know that they're good at, and perhaps put it in a different format, or change it in some way that makes it relevant to whatever's going on currently. But sometimes it doesn't make sense to always start with something new. most
No, I
things
think-
are
I think-
incremental versus
Yeah,
revolutionary.
I think if you look at some of the great, creative cities, they're great because they're building on things that they're already good at, or that they've already got, they've already invested in either emotionally or as well as financially. Rather than people saying, well, I want to be the next this or I want to be the next that. Look at what it is that you already have, and how can you grow and nurture that. And I think, again, from my own experience, I was quite good at school, I suppose, and I was a very good girl in terms of doing other things that you should do, in terms of going to college, going to university, etc., etc. But actually, my ability to, although I'm in charge of strategy, I am quite a strategic person, and I've grown quite a few businesses. And I can spot a business opportunity and so on and so on. I'm absolutely, utterly useless at writing that down, and I'm absolutely useless at it. So all the sorts of things that people think that I should be brilliant at, I don't know whether I can't do them, I just don't do them, really. So I think there are lots of people who think that they have to have the whole package, really. And what I've always done is worked on the things that I am good at, really. And then, other things happen that underpin that, really, that help you. And so often I've gone into things having no idea whether or not they'll succeed, absolutely no idea whatsoever. And it's literally like, jumping out of a window. But I've always operated on the basis that there's going to be a mattress there to catch me. And I might have a few occasional broken bones, but most of the time, absolutely, that is absolutely what's happened. I think, having that confidence to go into the unknown and work with the things that you feel that you're good at has been my learning, I suppose.
I think that's very true, and with certainly anyone who's starting something new, a new business. And you are the person who's doing it all, usually, unless you already have a network of people who are willing to work for you for free. But at least when you recognize that you don't have all the skill sets, for example, I know I'm not good at the accounting aspect of things. I don't like sending out bills, as an example. But recognizing that that's a limitation and acting on it instead of ignoring it is certainly a better approach.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I think there's a bit of a sort of a gender difference there. So when I was commissioning, and I'd see quite a lot of different filmmakers, and they'd all come in and pitch a project. And it was really interesting that the fellas would come in and they would talk about the 10% that they could do really, really well, and never talk about the 90% that they didn't know. Whereas women would come in and they'd talk about the 10% that they couldn't do, rather than talk about the 90% that they could. So I think you've got to sort of, you have to learn not to do that, not to focus on the things that you can't do, but focus on the things that you really, really can do. And I think the girls can learn a bit from the boys in that.
Yes, emphasizing what you know that you do well. I mean, because first it helps build confidence, so you're not being discouraged by the things that you're not very good at. Why spend a lot of time on that? Because, and a lot of it is not that you don't have the ability or you don't have the intelligence to do it. It is really a preference. If you have all these options in front of you to do, you know which ones you're going to prefer to do. If you're better at marketing or talking to people or networking, then definitely capitalize on that. And this is not high school where you have to learn a subject in order to get through high school. So I think that is very important, and I think over time, if you've ever run a business, you recognize your strengths. There was another aspect of the discussion yesterday, and some things that I've been thinking about with regard to economic value, and since I'm going to focus on small arts, including everything, business models that you found to be successful. Recently, there have been a glut, and I've been following the music industry particularly for a long time, and there's the larger consumption of music than ever before. There's music everywhere. But the people who are creating music are getting less and less money because of the various formats, streaming, all kinds of things. People aren't downloading, people aren't buying CDs. So the actual income that they're making from music is actually getting less because the competition is so, there's so much competition. So with regard to a glut, is there a glut? Is there overabundance of artistic options, whether it's visual arts or people who are creating their own films, people that are creating their own music? And if there is a glut, how can there be demand, in terms of the supply-demand? You end up paying more for things that they're shorter supply than you are when you have many, many options. And so I'm wondering if you have thought about maybe there's just too much of a good thing, and the internet provides so many options that you, for all intents and purposes, you don't have to pay for. Are we in a creative glut?
Creative glut? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think that what the internet's done is democratized both the ability to make and the way in which you can see stuff. So I think what you're talking about, I suppose, is the I don't know so much that there's overproduction. I'm sure that there always was as much production. I mean, maybe it's of a higher quality because the cost of doing it is the cost of professional equipment, is much reduced. But it's more around how does the consumer or the viewer or the audience navigate all of that. I think really what you're describing is that the people who used to hold the reins to the power, they're not making as much money anymore. And so it's more a discussion around who are the new gatekeepers. And in some ways, I suppose it's quite good. I think it's sort of democratically quite good that the gatekeepers aren't making so much money because, yes, some of it went to the artist, but, I think that there are a few artists that benefit wonderfully, but beneath that pyramid, there are loads and loads of other artists who don't necessarily benefit in the same way. I don't think that's been solved yet, but I think that perhaps what's happening is that we're beginning to be on a journey to recalibrate that. And I think that what's important is that, that people do pay for stuff in terms of if we believe that something's got a value, then we have to invest in the development of that, and we all have to take responsibility for being part of that ecosystem, really, which is an ongoing conversation I have with my children, when they're sort of trying to download stuff for free, and that's not a particularly great conversation, but trying to explain to people that that everything has a value, and just because you write something in your bedroom, which is what where a lot of creative businesses grow out from, that it still has a value than if you did it in in the middle of London or something like that. So I think that's one of the big things to tackle is that everybody understands that it's why it's important to pay for stuff. But I think that what's happened for generations, I suppose, is that unfortunately it was always calibrated much more towards the people who had the power, who had the platform, and who owned the keys to the gates, than to the artist. It's gone slightly the other way, but unfortunately the financial value hasn't found its way back to the artist yet. What can we do about that? Oh, I don't know. There are lots of people who are far cleverer than me who understand about law and et cetera, who hopefully are coming up with solutions. But I think what's really interesting is it's the technology companies these days that really hold the keys to that. And I think that what will happen is that those technology companies will become content companies, and then when they are content companies, then because what people want is they don't want the platform, they want the stuff. Right. So it has an inherent and intrinsic. The stuff has an inherent value to it, and so when we get to a position where that's what people want most, and that becomes the the point of differentiation for the technology companies, maybe then we'll see a slight change. If you look at the BBC, for example, BBC, greatest broadcaster in the world, etc. I think it is anyway, etc., etc. It started out as a technology company. That's what the BBC was. And it was a technology company before it was a content company. And lots of things that it has done creatively have grown out of the technology that it's developed. And so I think that sort of, to me, just shows, the thing that we all know about history, which is it just comes back again, and I think that's what will happen.
Well, while you were talking about the BBC, of course, I was thinking about all of my favorite shows on the BBC. But when you were earlier talking about culture and finding ways to leverage your culture, is that kind of, in some respects, what the BBC is doing? This is what we're good at. This is what people know about Britain generally, and so let's find ways to not only promote our cultural history, find ways to make it a financial resource. Is that the kind of thing you're discussing when you're thinking about culture, thinking about ways to monetize it, and is that some of your impression? Well, if you've got, let's say you work with what you've got.
Yeah.
And what you've got is culture. People know, they have an idea at least of what it means to be either a British subject or live in London. And we all have, minus Sherlock Holmes, everything should be revolve around that. And finding ways, identifying those things that you're recognized for, whether it's...
Yeah, I mean, obviously one wants to, doesn't want to... or rather wants to challenge particular stereotypes around, what it is to be British or what it is to be from a different part of the country, etc., etc. But yeah, I think that, I think what the BBC does for us is that it is a massive investor in the creative economy in the UK. So obviously you guys will know it because of the programmes that it makes, but a lot of those programmes come from independent production companies that are in different parts of the country, so that it collects a national voice from the various disparate and diverse communities that we have. So it's really important. The BBC is a really important it's an important buyer and it's an important investor. So it buys stuff, it invests in culture, and it obviously invests in our creative businesses, and then it showcases those to the world. So it's really, really important in that sort of two-way dialogue.
So is it a corporate entity and a government entity, or is it all government? Is it owned by?
No, it's not owned by the government.
Okay.
No, so the BBC it receives taxpayers' money through a licence fee.
Okay.
So it's funded by the public. It's owned by the British public, really. It has it's overseen by government, and we're just going through a process of the BBC going through its charter renewal. So it has a royal charter, so which sort of will lay down a framework within which it will operate. And there's been lots of discussion about the threat to the BBC budget and all those sorts of things that will. It's I think because we all pay a license fee, that's quite a challenging idea now in a digital world. It works very well if you've got in an analog system, but if actually everybody's viewing on digital, that's quite hard to police. And so it's got a lot of challenges, but I think the BBC, despite lots of difficult circumstances it finds itself in the reduced resources and so on, it's very much loved by the British public, but it's also globally trusted, and trust and institutions is quite often these days not two words you don't find in the same sentence. So the BBC as a trusted international institution is a rare and wonderful thing, I think.
Well, I wanted to end the conversation with a question about your dreams for the future with regard to Creative England and your own business, these collaborative efforts, creating content, getting the intellectual property pulling these things together, what are you hoping for when you look back at what you've created?
I think that the thing I'm most hopeful about is that a lot of the businesses that we work with in the far-flung reaches of our country do find a global audience for their either their stories or their products or their services. I think the thing that drives me most is economic disadvantage, and I think we have quite a challenge in our country, even though it's a very small, it's very small, but there is a real regional variation when it comes to opportunity, and our talent. I said this yesterday. Our mantra is that talent is everywhere, but it doesn't always have equal access to the right sort of opportunities, to the money, to the markets, to the networks that help it thrive. So the thing that we do is to connect people to those things. And so my idea of success is finding those businesses that without access to those markets actually wouldn't be able to thrive or even survive. So that's I suppose the thing that I feel I'm most hoping for in terms of success. And we've seen that already, because some of our businesses are doing incredibly well in the States, and that's a massive achievement, because you've got such a huge market here, and you are world leaders in so many parts of the creative economy, in world leaders in many industries, really. So actually linking businesses here up with opportunities and markets in the States is a great success for us, as long as they come back. So they're allowed to export here, but they've got to come back and pay their taxes in the UK.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was great meeting you, and have a wonderful stay.
Thank you very much.
Listen Vision, listen Vision, DC's #1 recording studio. Oh!